It could be argued that without Blick Mead, there would be no Stonehenge. A bold conjecture indeed, but we hope that after you've heard this little discussion, you'll agree that this site, which predates the stone monument that we know and love by thousands of years, is way more important to the whole Stonehenge landscape than many realise. Let's see if we can make the case. Talking about this site, I must admit that I have the slight advantage, having been at Blick Mead and taken part in the excavations last year. So, I mean, what I thought I'd ask you, Rupert, what your perception is of this site, having largely only viewed it through the written word, the occasional video, and a few photos. Yes. It's an interesting site to have this discussion about. So, what's your perception of it?
It's interesting on a lot of levels. I mean, the main thing really is, well, number one, its proximity to Stonehenge. It's only a mile to the east, so it's it's significant in this landscape. But it's a spring. It's a spring where the water is at constant temperature, so it would never have frozen over. That's an amazing reason for people to have started settling there. But the age of it, the fact that we're talking about 9,000 to 10,000 years ago that it started being settled. The fact that in excavations, the numbers of flint fragments and bladelets and what have you, I mean, it's tens of thousands of flint artifacts. And then the numbers of bones, animal bones. This was clearly a very important settled place. And it's got to be said that, all this is gleaned from a number of trenches, but by no means the whole area. So Lord knows what they'd find if they actually excavated, a football field's worth of it. I don't know what size it would actually have been settled at the time. But hugely significant. I've actually got a list. If it gives an idea of what was being consumed there, I've got a list of, so there was aurochs bones, red deer, wild pig, sheep, goat, hare, roe deer, and that's the bulk of it. There's odds and sods on top of that, whether it's fish or birds. But so clearly that they're catching a lot of food, eating it all at this settlement. It's it's very significant.
Do you agree with the premise? I know it's early days to be sort of extrapolating the meaning of Blick Mead, but do you broadly agree with the premise that this site is special in certain ways and gives us an insight into why the stuff that is on the Stonehenge landscape, if I can call it that, is there? Is it a fair thing to say without Blick Mead there would be no Stonehenge?
Probably. I think for me, what's special about it is it's simply down to that spring of constant temperature that even in a harsh winter it would not have frozen over. That's what makes it special for me. That clearly people would have been exploiting that as a settlement site. I personally, there's all sorts of conjecture about the sort of ritual aspects potentially of the site. Well, for me, I don't need to go there. You don't need to add to the importance of a spring at constant temperature. I don't think you need to gild that lily, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, sure. I suppose that that me having been there, albeit only for the one day, it's become very special to me, and I hold up my hand because I should have chased up David Jakes, who has been in charge of the Blick Mead excavation forever.
Yes,
from day one, and we haven't had him on the show. and we haven't had an interview with him. Because he's a character. He's so enthusiastic, and it's infectious when you're with him. I have to say,
beyond passionate about Blick Mead. I've rarely seen somebody so passionate about an individual site. And hats off to him. I mean, he's done some fantastic work. So he has every right to be.
That. Yeah, I mean, it speaks to that thing that so many of the great projects that have great results have people with character and leadership at their helm. And Blick Mead is a special case in that regard, because it was David that had the idea of excavating in this place in the grounds of in the Amesbury Abbey, when all about him were saying, no, there's no Mesolithic stuff in the Stonehenge landscape. We've got, at that point they had 30 bladelets or stuff from all over the place. When he started the dig, and he wasn't looking for a Mesolithic settlement. He was trying to give context to the landscape in terms of what animals would have been doing in the landscape, and he was looking for the waterscape, in association with the Avon and stuff, and so he, it was a high risk sort of endeavour, and boy has he come up trumps. I don't know, did you say the number of flint tools that have come up in the over over 10 years, isn't it?
The last time I looked, it was getting on 30,000, wasn't it?
Oh no, it's much bigger. It's 90,000.
Is it 90,000 now? Okay,
90,000. Bladelets and tools that have come out, and bit of other context. He's not excavating a large area. In his own words, it's the size of a football penalty. That's kind of what I was getting at earlier on. That I can't help wondering, in a lot of the prehistoric landscape. When I say prehistoric, I'm talking archaeologically here. It's what you do in an excavation is that you dig trenches, and those trenches are by definition, all right, carefully selected, but they're a very tiny amount of ground that you're actually looking into. So, really have no idea how extensive the site itself might have been. No idea at all. I know, but to be digging down in this very small area and be coming up with the results that have come out of the ground is either extremely lucky, or he had some kind of sixth sense going on about what was possibly going on. But
was it the spring that led him there in the first place?
Well, I'm not sure it was that extant, before it started digging the particular area. I think it was the spring, to be fair, but it's in the Amesbury Abbey grounds. They are landscaped gardens which incorporate the spring. But that's a bit irrelevant. The point is, in this small space, and I've got this subjective thing of having been there, to be able to look down the ground. While I was there, they were uncovering more aurochs footprints. At that particular level, and when you're in a place and it's happening in front of your eyes, some part of your brain sort of takes it for granted, and it's only afterwards you're thinking, "My." What was I actually looking at there? From 8,000 more years ago, this giant aurochs came down to this spring to drink down here. And there's there were aurochs bones coming out of the ground while I was there, and of course the other. What I haven't quite got in my head is the combination of a watering hole. He likened in one interview, he likened the aurochs to water buffalo in South Africa, to a watering hole. That as an image is a good one.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
I don't get is quite the combination, obviously, that this would make this a very attractive site for hunters, because they know that the animal's going to come here, but the very close adjacency of a settlement site, whether it's temporary or not. I don't know. I'm not quite sure in my head, exactly how that works. But the fact of the matter is that they built a little platform. They made a platform of stones to extend their ability to go to the water's edge from the settlement.
Yeah, and that in itself was an interesting feature, because nearly all the other Mesolithic platforms that are known have been timber. So that is an interesting point. There's also, you talking about it being a watering hole, that one of the other interesting artifacts that can't call it an artifact, but one of the the things that they excavated was an auroch's heel bone that actually had a flint arrowhead in it, and that raised the question of, well, was that just a particularly bad shot, or was it a practice to deliberately maim an animal, so that it's now easier to catch and bring down, if not immediately, make an animal lame, and it's going to be easier to catch, especially when it's something like an aurochs that was supposed to be pretty ferocious creatures, and let's be honest, 3 times the size of the cows that we see
Jersey
today.
Cow, yeah.
They must have been formidable animals to bring down.
The other thing that I think David Jakes has incorporated very well, he's not just concentrated on this, postage stamp keyhole into the past there, but he's been very, very keen to integrate what he's been finding in this small space into the general landscape. And that's, has to be reiterated way before Stonehenge itself, way before the Stonehenge curses, way before the Coneybury Anomaly, which we may have talked about before. This is, pretty early stuff. There have been other Mesolithic hunting pits been found along Kingsbarrow Ridge, just up there fairly recently, so that's interesting. But one of David Jakes' theses about the landscape was it was particularly advantageous because of the old river tracts that run about the Stonehenge landscape. When you're there, you're not so aware, of the contours of the land, of the topography there. But Stonehenge itself is on quite a high, hill, rise. It's quite high in the landscape. But around that, you've got these old river courses, which he says for prehistoric hunters provide fantastic kill zones. When you've got the herding animals going across the landscape, the skilled hunters working together can deal, they can reap their harvest quite well because the landscape suits them. It's not the way we think at all about landscape, but it would be almost instinctive, I suppose, to hunter-gatherers. And without being able to show a map right now, it's difficult to say, but all around Stonehenge, and certainly Blick Mead down there itself, it's a happy hunting ground.
Very much so. Very much so.
And this may be to do with the fact, remember, until quite recently, it was assumed that areas like Stonehenge, the whole of Britain, would be heavily forested. And we found out that particularly round about here on the Salisbury Plain, that it was not that way at all. It was quite open. Yes, there were woods, but for the most part, it was open. Yeah. We know this because they've been able to work out the life, the annual behaviours of aurochs. They spent...
not just that, it's Mike Allen's research with snails. Mike is an expert on snails in prehistory, and so he'll take a core sample, a soil sample from henge ditches, for example, and look at the microscopic snails within it. And if you know which sort of habitat each of those creatures lives within, then you can tell what the landscape was like. And his research across the Salisbury Plain showed that swathes of that were not forested at all, ever. So that's interesting.
Here's another interesting thing that he's been able to discern, and that is the people living there, hunting there, were not necessarily local.
Mm-hmm.
At the site, there is a limestone artifact that can only come from the Cheddar Gorge.
Sandstone, you mean, surely?
Sandstone, yeah. That comes from the Cheddar Gorge. And there's a piece of slate that probably comes from Wales, from South Wales. A piece of slate that's been made into... it looks like a sort of spearhead, doesn't it? It's a sort of sharp point thing. But about, a well-styled piece of implement, whatever it's for, but the slate itself is not local. It's either from Wales or it's from Cornwall, apparently. And a dog's tooth.
Yes, a single dog's tooth. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, the isotope analysis for that puts the dog outside of the area. Though, somewhere north, some say as far as Yorkshire or something like that. But
certainly not local, wherever it was from. Yeah,
certainly not local. So suddenly you've got this image not just of a huddled group of hunters living by the waterside day in, day out, but a very fluid interaction or travel distances, perhaps, of if not the whole group, then certainly certain members of it. And also the thing to remember is, if you're thinking Cheddar Gorge, these people probably looked not far, pretty much like Cheddar Man.
Yes. Dark skin, blue eyes.
That's the one.
Yeah, there is some contention over the extremeness of the colour, whether they were sort of African black or paler than that, more North African, but nevertheless not like us at all to look at. No.
Yeah. So I don't know, if are we doing Blick Mead justice? I think it's so complicated a thing and so detailed that we can only skim the surface as far as what's available. And the promise must be to get in touch with David again.
Yeah, we should do that.
And get him on the show.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think for the purposes of this podcast, it's really to flag it up if you don't know of it already, and so it's well worth looking into. I mean, you have a site here that's deep into the Mesolithic, 9,000-10,000 years ago, and in constant use for thousands of years. Now, that in itself is significant, hugely significant.
Yeah. But making the case, I suppose. It seems obvious, or the extrapolation is, that people were choosing this place, particularly, with the intensity of activity that's represented here. They were choosing this place particularly to settle and do their activities. Ergo, it's no wonder that it becomes, through time, this concentration of monuments and buildings in the ground and ultimately Stonehenge occur. We can't go away without mentioning the particular effect that the pond, that the spring can have on anything, some things that fall into it. Flints, for example. there's a particular algae, a very rare algae that exists in the pond called Hildenbrandia. And interestingly, I don't know if you heard David Jacques tell this story, but it was his mum that discovered it. He was there, showing some people around, and his mum there, and he shooed her away because she was talking too much, and she went and picked up a bit of flint out of the out of the stream, and she was wandering around with it in her pocket. And then, a bit while later, she took it out of her pocket and it turned pink, fluorescent pink.
Yeah.
And you think, well, was that going on then? That would make it a bit special. There's no reason to suppose that it wasn't, that this particular algae wasn't active then. So that the rarity of that, and I suppose associated with how warm the spring is itself. Anything put in there and then taken out, and a few hours later it turns pink. Wow.
Yeah, that's magic. Yeah.
And I have to say, that is the word I use. It is a magical place to go down there, even though it's barely 10 yards from the A303.
Yeah.
You're in this little Dingley Dell, green Dingley Dell, with in the landscape, in a sort of capability brown type landscape thing, albeit a bit aged, but whizzing by is the traffic of the A303, and after a while it completely disappears. Yeah, and I'll never forget spending that day with my hands in almost freezing water, sifting through mud, to feel, if there was a bit of worked flint in there.
Yeah.
And in that time, I found 5 or 6, microliths, and it was just magical. It was just keeps coming out of the ground. It was astonishing.
Yeah. Yes, heaven knows how much there is under the ground there. So much there must be. Yeah. Hey ho.
We've covered a lot of ground. There's a heck of a lot more to uncover, and maybe some aspects that we've missed entirely. I don't know. But I hope as a kind of introduction to Blick Mead, if you didn't know much about it before, I hope that has served some kind of purpose. I think with that, it's probably time to say goodbye, unless you've got anything to add there, Rupert.
No, I don't know no more.
You don't know no more. No, me neither, really. No, surprise.
Thanks for listening, folks. Well, see you soon.
Yeah. Till the next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Stopping recording, 23 minutes. Ooh.